All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Fuller. I'm Chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Road Commissioners, and I am participating virtually, but I am at the Yard 1 Boardroom, 555 North Zeeb Road in Washtenaw County, Michigan. Are we going to call the roll for this? I think, is Tiffany? Yep, Tiffany's with us. Is Tiffany prepared to call the roll?
She's having to, oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
Yes. Yep, I am prepared. Commissioner Barb Fuller.
Present, participating from Yard 1, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Doug Fuller.
Commissioner Tiffany, did you say Doug Fuller?
I did.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I am present, and I am also at Yard 1 in Scioto Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Rod Green.
Morning, I'm present and participating from Superior Township, Washtenaw County.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas.
Good morning. I am participating from Pittsfield Township in Washtenaw County.
Commissioner Joanne McCollum.
I'm present and I am attending from Ypsilanti Charter Township.
Cheryl Siddle.
Here.
Matt McDonnell.
Present.
Jim Harmon.
Present.
Dan Ackerman.
Here.
Thank you. Emily, you want to give us our instructions on how people who might be tuning in remotely can participate?
Sure. So now that we're at our public comment period, there are a couple ways that you can make public comment, and we're going to ask you to virtually raise your hand to do so. So if you're viewing the meeting on your computer, you want to first make sure that you click the join audio button, and then you can raise your hand by clicking the reactions button or the participants button. It depends on what version of Zoom you have at the bottom of your screen, and then the raise hand button at the bottom right. You should see it show up when you see reactions. If you dialed into the meeting from your touch tone phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. And I will unmute participants with raised hands one at a time. And we just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. At this time, Commissioner, there is no one with a raised hand.
All right. Then we will proceed to the next item, the 2020 audit findings presented by Plant Moran. Cheryl, can I pass the baton to you to do any introductory remarks?
Sure. And I'm very quickly going to hand it over to Dan Ackerman. As we were having a quite robust discussion about budget even before the meeting started, this is nice to see that this is a topic that is so well received by this board. So with us today, we have Keith Szymanski and Jean with Plant Moran, and they are going to run through our 2020 audit findings, basically confirm where we landed at the end of last year, and that it was a successful audit, which is of course what we always want to hear. And then shortly after that, we will go ahead and we'll move into our first quarter budget review. But with that, I'd be more than happy to hand it over to Dan.
Well, Cheryl, you about covered it, and you know, we're very excited to have a couple of professionals from Plant Moran, and as she mentioned, and we've mentioned to the board, fiscally in 2020 was a pretty good year. We initially had deficit spending of over $5 million, and that actually came back to about $600,000 deficit spending. So again, you know, just a really good year for us financially, and Keith and Jean will cover all the numbers, and feel free to ask questions at any time. This is something we want, you know, is for the board, for you to just get a good understanding of, you know, why things ended up in such a good position. But this is definitely for the board. So, you know, don't be shy. And I guess I'll turn it over to Keith right now. Thanks.
Actually, I think Jean's going to start us off.
Yep. So good morning. My name is Jean Young. I'm the partner on the account, and with me is Keith Szymanski, and he's the senior manager. So again, thank you for inviting us to the board meeting. I know it's virtual. You did receive the financials, so you would have gotten a hard copy, it sounds like, of the financial statements, and then also a letter to governance. And really what we intend to do, I'm going to cover that letter And then Keith's going to jump into the graph presentation. I think the graphs are a little bit easier to digest than that thick packet of financial statements, but we're happy to answer any questions that you would have on them. Also, I really want to thank Dan and Cheryl and everyone in assisting in the audit. So again, this was completed March 15th. So Dan was really able to get everything ready. We were able to close down the audit even during the pandemic. He provided everything that we requested. So we appreciate that cooperation. And again, as auditors, we always ask questions, and we may ask the same question a different way multiple times. So we appreciate their assistance in that process. So I'm just going to go through this letter quickly. I know we have some new board members, so just to let you know, the audit standards quite a few years ago kind of said there really should be more discussion with what's called those charged with governance. So those charged with governance would be the board. So this letter, there's really two letters that are issued under the audit. There's a pre-communication letter that we kind of tell our audit plan, but not give all the details, but kind of highlight some of the risk areas. Talk with a board member to make sure we understand if there's any significant concerns they have. And then this would really be the wrap-up letter. We also have a couple of recommendations included in this letter, but if you want to go to the next page, Keith. So really, an audit, our responsibility under the auditing standards is basically to provide an opinion on whether the financial statements are materially correct. So that's not absolute correct, but with reasonable correctness of the financials. You did receive an unmodified or a clean opinion, which is the highest level that we can provide. And you may notice in your opinion letter that it refers to the governmental activities, each major fund, and the aggregate information. Last year, you had to add that fiduciary fund, which is your OPEB trust fund that you have. So now you would have a financial statement that discusses the road fund, and then you have the reporting on the entity-wide, and then you also have on page 12 of your financial statements, really the trust financial position of those assets that are set aside for your OPEB, your post-retiree healthcare plan. We also, as part of the audit, would evaluate internal controls and get an understanding of key controls. We're not given an opinion on those controls, but we just want to evaluate whether there's any segregation of duties or significant flaws. We obviously, during the pandemic, do take COVID and the pandemic into consideration. Are people working from home? Has access changed? Has approval processes changed, and things like that? So we do consider that in our audit plan. Under significant accounting policies, your accounting policies are in note 1. There were no changes this year. Under accounting estimates, you will see there's a couple of items. So as was discussed a little bit, your most significant estimates for you would be that OPEB or post-employment retirement benefit, the health insurance, and the pension. And really that's impacted by multiple factors outside of your control. So the investments are impacted by obviously the market. The discount rate is impacted by the future rate of return expected, future healthcare cost, life mortality, what's the mortality rate, projected salary increases. And really, I wanted to clarify on that. The actuaries have their own standards that they have to comply with. So they have to make sure that these are reasonable and meeting the actuarial standards. And then we also would review that information and make sure it makes sense based on the data that we're aware of. We're comfortable with the estimates that are currently presented, but as was discussed, this can really fluctuate. Some of these assumption changes can be pretty big swings, either positive or negative. And I think we'll go through that as Keith's going to cover a couple of graphs specifically on the OPEB and pension. Your other estimate relates to the self-insurance claims, and that's consistent and no concerns there. On the last part of the letter, the disclosures in the financials are neutral and clear. We had no difficulties with management, no disagreements with management. Those are always nice. And we also had no corrected or uncorrected misstatements that we need to make you aware of. So again, a very standard clean letter. The last page is really just a couple of items. So obviously with COVID-19, we have task force in all of our industries in our firm. We have people that are just dedicated to trying to stay current on all the information. And as you can imagine, this information can change daily, it can change hourly. There's many questions that are still out there. So this is just a resource for you and management if you want to go out. We've done webinars, we have papers, just trying to, again, provide information to assist our clients with this constantly evolving federal grants that are out there, controls, IT, and various items. The last item is just on cybersecurity. Obviously, with everyone more virtual, a lot of people are trying to take advantage of this. So just keeping everyone's eyes open and making sure you're evaluating these controls and considering any threats, as every time something comes up, they get smarter and try and come up with new things. So it's just a constant process to battle against that. So that's a quick overview of the letter. Again, Keith's going to jump in and cover the graphs. If you have specific questions on the letter or the financials and the graphs, we're happy to answer those.
I have a question in the cybersecurity section.
Yep.
And this is no disrespect of Chris and Josh and Cheryl and the team. You don't mention ransom. And it's come to my attention that at least one township in this county has been the victim of a ransom threat,
Ransomware?
I guess,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word. So do you have best practices that you are sharing with your clients to protect against ransom threats?
Yeah, and we kind of consider all that within that cybersecurity. So, you know, we need to understand controls related to the IT systems when we're doing the audit, but we don't really do an audit or effectiveness of the IT controls. We actually have a group of consultants. We have what's called a 7-point cybersecurity checklist that they can go through and do a mini assessment. We do also have best practices we can share. It's really just an awareness and that this constantly evolves, right? So it's just really staying and maintaining on that. So we can provide more information. Also happy to have our consultants talk with people directly just to highlight any comments that would be available that would assist the organization.
And Jean, if I may, Barb, this is a recent conversation we had, Chris and I had with our new managed service provider, talking about ransomware. First of all, you need to have adequate backups that are kind of separate from your network. So if something were to happen, you can shut that down. You can go to your backups and then be up and running and not have to worry about having to pay because you've got all that information there. And that's basically what the ransomware, that's what they do. You pay for your data. So, you know, and as we've talked, we'd like to have a more thorough backup as far as a replica of what we have at the main yard here. You know, so we could be up and running almost within minutes. But that is something that we are constantly monitoring for. There's some real-time protections we have. So, you know, almost immediately, if something, you know, if someone were to try something like that, the system should be aware and lock things down. But, you know, that's something that Chris and I and our managed service providers are constantly talking about, because as Jean said, unfortunately, the bad guys are getting better and better at what they do. So the goal is to try and stay one step ahead as best we can. So that's definitely something that's always on our mind, and we're trying to do everything we can to stay ahead of it.
Yeah, and just to build on that, we also have cybersecurity insurance as well. So while we're trying to balance all the best practices and understand what our exposure would be, we do also have insurance should it reach a certain level as well.
That's great. Yeah, it was Webster Township that got hit, and they certainly managed it well, according to John Kingsley's remarks. But I just want to make sure that we don't get stung, right? And it sounds like things are in place to make sure we're ready to lock things down and then have backups that we're on the ground running immediately. And the VPNs, right, with everybody working remotely is where a vulnerability that we didn't have to the degree that we did a year ago has now become more prevalent.
Yeah, and it is about risk management, Barb. So we won't necessarily be immediately like throw the switch and we can go right over to this backup system, but we can be back up and running relatively quickly. And that's exactly been part of the conversations that have been taking place. What level of downtime could we assume as an organization, and how much are we willing to invest? If we truly want to be able to throw the switch over, that's a certain level of investment. We're trying to certainly find that appropriate spot as far as investment, and then still saying, okay, we acknowledge that we're not quite willing to be at that level, but that we can get back up and running in a relatively quick time period.
Okay.
And Barb, you mentioned everybody VPNing from home. We have what's called two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
So when I'm at home and I log on through the VPN, I'll get something through a number that I provided. You know, most people provide their cell phone number to basically prove that I am who I say I am, and I have to accept that in order to get access. So that's one thing we've tried to do to mitigate all the people that are VPNing into the network.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I will start off by jumping into the graphs, which provide a high-level summary of what took place in terms of the financial results, rather than going through the large financial statement document itself. But as Jean mentioned, we'll be happy to take questions on the graphs or the financial statements as we're going or at the end. So before we dive into them, just a little bit of a preview of what we'll see on the next few slides. We talk a lot about fund balance and the equity that the Road Commission maintains from one year to the next. And I think 2020 was the type of year that demonstrates the importance of having a strong fund balance on hand, with the unpredictability of what was going to take place with the Road Commission's budget and its revenue sources once the pandemic set in. The comfort of having a strong fund balance on hand allowed the Road Commission to make the decision that they were going to continue with operations as was originally planned, while monitoring the budget throughout the year. And so fortunately, as we'll see on the first slide, when we get into the revenue comparison, the actual results were not quite as dire as what was originally anticipated. And so revenue was pretty close to what it was. But that's actually going to be slide number 2. As I start off with slide number 1, we've got a sort of a composition of the balance sheet with the debit items on the left and the credit items on the right, excuse me. And you'll see the largest categories on the respective sides are cash and investments among the assets and fund balance among the liabilities and equity. And that's an indication, again, that the Road Commission has a very strong fund balance. There are a small amount of liabilities. There always will be some accounts payable for vendor invoices, some payroll that's been earned but not quite paid out at the end of the year, as well as some longer term items. But the fact that of the $32 million on each side, $21.5 million is in cash and $21 million is in fund balance does, as I said, show that the Road Commission has a strong balance sheet and is well positioned financially going into 2021 and beyond. The second slide is the 5-year comparison of revenue for the Road Commission. As you can see, the largest category of revenue is the Act 51 or MTF disbursements from the state of Michigan. It typically is the largest revenue source for all road commissions. And you can see that prior to 2018, total revenue was less than $50 million. And then in 2018, as MTF revenue grew and some of the other revenue sources increased, for the last 3 years, the Road Commission's been steadily just under about $60 million of total revenue each year. MTF is the one where there was the greatest question mark once the pandemic set in of how that was going to change, particularly with the gas taxes and people staying home for the time. But luckily that rebounded pretty well during the year. So the total for 2020 was $29.7 million, and that was a couple $100,000 more than the actual for 2019. So while a very modest increase, much better than what some of the predictions were in the middle of 2020. Some of the other large revenue categories are the other federal and state sources and the revenue from local governments. A lot of these are driven by the nature of the construction projects and exactly how they're being funded for those particular projects. And for that reason, there is some variability from year to year. There are some years in which there's a greater percentage that's funded by federal revenue. Sometimes there's particular projects that have more state revenue, and other times there are projects where there's greater local contributions. So overall, these didn't change a whole lot from 2019 to 2020. The local revenue decreased by about $3.2 million, but the other federal and state sources made up most of that. They increased $2.5 million. So overall, there was some variability between the categories, but the total was pretty close to where it was a year ago.
Keith, can you talk about the yellow piece? Just make a few comments.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm glad you pointed that out. So
yeah,
as you might recall, going back to beginning in 2015, there was a countywide property tax millage dedicated to roads. So throughout the entire county, that brings in about $7 million. The cities receive their piece more or less directly. It does go through the road commission, but it's not road commission revenue. So you can see that for the 5 years presented here, it's been consistently between $3 and a little bit more than $4 million each year. And that's been a tremendous resource to the road commission, allowing them to do some additional road projects throughout the county that otherwise wouldn't have been done without this additional funding source that the voters have approved a couple times now.
Back up one, a question.
Yes.
Why was the property tax from the county millage higher in 2016?
That was from Public Act 283, Barb, and that's something that the county board approved that. And then starting in 17, that was the first year of the 4-year millage. And if you recall, the county board approved the legislation, but I believe 20% goes to parks. And
That
so
is correct.
that's basically the 20% going to parks, starting in
Thank you.
17.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I'll move on to briefly talk about the 5-year comparison of road fund expenditures. Just as revenue has been around $60 million for the last couple of years, so too have the expenditures. And you can see the largest category is the road improvement program, excuse me. So that is naturally the largest category of expenditures for most road commissions, and it's where you expect road commissions to be spending most of their money. So while there has to be some administrative expenditures to, handle all the administrative work and make sure the road commission runs, that the employees out there repairing the roads and the contractors that are helping to repair them are getting paid on a timely basis, and that those types of things are being administered. There are administrative costs and non-departmental expenditures, but nearly $37 million of the total $61 million spent in 2020 was invested directly into the road improvement program, including capital outlay. And overall, expenditures have been very consistent from 2019 to 2020, just an increase of about $586,000.
And I just want to reiterate what Keith said. The road improvements had the highest increases, which means the increase in MTF is going into the roads. If you look at our, especially administration, operations, engineering departments, there are some minor fluctuations, but pretty consistent. But this graph to me is showing that those increases in MTF is going back into the roads, which is of course what we want it to be, what we want to do.
This next slide on fund balance sort of accumulates the previous two for revenues and expenditures. So in 2020 in particular, there was a slight excess of expenditures greater than revenue of about $600,000. And so that does account for the slight decrease in fund balance, but more or less it was a break-even year compared to 2019. So after several years in which the Road Commission was able to accumulate fund balance, particularly you can see the large jump from 17 to 18 and then another small increase from 18 to 19. The Road Commission did use about $642,000 of fund balance, really just about 3% of the total, so very minor. As we talked about, that was planned given the uncertainties that set in during the pandemic, and at one point was projected to be a much greater spending of fund balance, but fortunately came out to be just a very small amount. And so we also have here the fund balance broken out into the various categories that are presented in the financial statements. There is $2.6 million that's in non-spendable form that's already been spent on prepaid expenses and inventory. And so those will be consumed in future years, but aren't available in the form of cash for other operations. A very small amount of committed fund balance, but then $13 million, the largest category, is assigned fund balance. And so there's no legal restriction on how that fund balance is going to be spent in the future. But the fact that it's assigned does show that the Road Commission has internal plans for it. And it tells the readers that the Road Commission plans to spend that on categories such as the 2021 budget, future capital improvements, future contributions to pension and retiree healthcare, and to cover the self-insured liability going forward as well. So after all that's been accounted for, the residual is about $5 million of unassigned fund balance. And that's available for any form of operations going into the future. We do show on the far right the projected fund balance for the end of 2021 that was based on the approved budget. It did show a use of fund balance of more than $3 million. But again, we've seen that in the past, and that's sort of a best estimate of what the revenues will be for 2021, as well as the legal maximum for expenditures. So in accordance with state law, governmental entities can't spend more than what was budgeted. So although the projected use of fund balance is about $3 million, we would suspect it's probably going to be a little bit less than that. But of course, the Road Commission will monitor that on a quarterly basis, as we'll be discussing after this one, and keep the board and the rest of management informed of what the budget looks like throughout the year. I think I did see a hand go up, so I'll pause to see if there's a question while we're here.
Yes, I had a question. I was just looking at the report in the binder and just trying to follow along with the PowerPoint. But it seems like the numbers are real different, like the fund balance.
So
Can you give us a page number, Joanne,
I'm
so
on
we can
page
follow with you?
9 to 10. Is that, am I on
Yep.
the wrong pages?
So go to page 10,
Okay,
and the fund balance is in the road fund
Oh.
column.
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So those assigned numbers, Keith, the assigned numbers that Keith talked about are those various categories. That's that 13.249.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So while we were talking about the road fund in particular to start with, that's more of a short-term snapshot of where the Road Commission was at the end of the year and where they brought in money and spent money during 2020. These next two graphs, we're going to cover the pension plan and the retiree healthcare, or OPEB as we sometimes refer to it, plans. And so these are long-term obligations. These are promises that have been made to employees. They're earned throughout the employee's entire years of service with the Road Commission, and then are due in the form of pension payments and retiree healthcare coverage throughout their retirement. So, you know, we'll see in both cases, the Road Commission is underfunded. The liabilities are currently greater than the assets set aside. But we'll also talk about what the Road Commission has been doing to fund these long-term obligations and work towards improving those funded percentages. So starting with the pension plan here on graph number 6, for 2019, which is the most recent measurement date, that's the MERS fiscal year end is December 31st as well. So the most recent year available at the time we're doing the audit is 2019. So the total liability was about just over $63 million, and the assets set aside in the MERS trust were $39 million. So that equated to a funded ratio of 54%, which is the bottom line here in the graph. And you can see it's been consistently in the 50% for the last few years. It was a bit higher than that in 2012 and 2013. But as we were talking about before the meeting started, there are several factors that play into this. There have been a couple significant assumption changes on the part of MERS to update their mortality tables, the estimate of how long everyone is living, as well as to reduce their expectation of the rate of return on the assets in the trust. And so as they make those assumption changes, those in particular cause the liability to increase immediately. So that tries to give us all the best projection of what the liability is, but also decreases the funded ratio at the same time. So while the funded ratio has been in the 50s for the last several years, if you follow the line sort of in the middle of the table there, the annual required contribution, you can see was $1.2 million in 2012 and has been steadily increasing to over $2.6 million for 2020. So the Road Commission has, as required by the state constitution, been making these required contributions each year. And as we can see, in most years has been making excess contributions, so more than what was required to go into the trust. So the Road Commission, you know, from our perspective, is doing everything prudent in terms of making required and excess contributions into the trust, and hopefully it's just a matter of time for the actual funded ratio to start to catch up with where the liability is and start to grow beyond the 50s. But you know, the state has a threshold to be at least 60% funded after several years. The Road Commission has a plan to get there by making the required contributions and excess contributions, and remains on track to get up to that minimum threshold and then beyond it in future years.
So just to restate that, the state requires a 60% funding ratio. And
Yes.
we are currently at just under 54, right? And each year Dan has put forth a plan for achieving the required ratio, and it has been accepted by the state of Michigan each time, correct?
That's correct. You're referring to PA 202. We're required to submit our OPEB and pension funding levels each year. And unfortunately, we're subjected to different criteria than county government, road commissions are. And if that criteria applied to us, we would be fine and not even have to submit a plan. But because we're road commissions, we're treated a little differently. But you know, the state of Michigan has approved that each year. And we also, besides talking to Plant Moran, we talked to MERS, who handles our pension. and they said, you know, we are fine as well. You know, we have a plan, and you know, we continue to put in an excess amount, which we weigh that amount with all the other needs that we have. So we make sure that you know, everything isn't going into pension as opposed to the roads. It's a delicate balance, right? And you know, so we feel comfortable with where we are, and eventually we will get to that 60%. And the state of Michigan is confident that we will as well.
Dan, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Based on what we know right now, and we have from 2018 to 2019, according to the charts on our screen, we have moved up 2 percentage points in the funded ratio, which is certainly in the right direction. There's a huge drop from 17 to 18, which those of us that were here certainly understand why. My question is the ratio next year going to be an improvement on this one, do you think, based on what you know today?
You know, again, so not knowing what the rate of return is, but I think it actually was pretty decent in 2020. That's a huge impact. You know, when you're looking at millions and millions of dollars. You know, I don't think MERS changed any of their assumptions for 2020. Gene or Keith, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So I would expect it to increase, but probably not much. Again, you know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So if there is an increase, I would expect, you know, the rate of return maybe to help us a little bit, and or the investments, I should say. So I would expect a slight increase, but you know, we won't know until we receive our report. And Gene and Keith, I don't know, you might have some more insight than I do. So
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to say, based on market performance, I think it's probably a safe bet that the value of the assets in the trust have increased, but it's more difficult to predict what's going to happen with the liability, you know, given, you know, who's retiring, how long they're living, are any retirees already living longer than expected. So that part of the equation that goes into the funding ratio is more difficult to predict.
Yes, and I agree. So one thing I wanted to share in the financial statements, because again, these pension disclosures and the OPEB disclosures are pretty complicated. And as Keith said, I mean, it's really, there's a lot of items outside of your control, right? So you have the obligation, which is the liability predicted for all employees, and that's impacted by mortality, that's impacted by salary increases, just many factors. I mean, even COVID is going to have to be taken into account into the future, because the actuary is going to consider the new mortality tables and how long people are living, when will people retire, et cetera. Then you have the actual investments, which also are outside of your control of what the market's going to perform. Not to scare anyone, but if you go to page 32, maybe Keith, you could bring this up. We want to just highlight, as Dan said, this is really long-term. This is a long-term obligation. You have the annual required contribution that you're meeting, but we're required in the financial statements to do a sensitivity disclosure. It's page 32 of the financial, so should be pretty close to there. So if you look at page 32, just to kind of highlight right now, that 33 million, the column in the center is what you currently have recorded. If that discount rate So if we expect future investment rates to go down, if it goes down to 6.6, just one full percentage, the liability would increase from 33 to 42 million. If that goes up to 8.6, your obligation would go down from 33 to 26. So you can see that these can have a sensitive impact on these obligations. I think the best thing that you can do is make sure you're putting in the contributions that are required. And again, putting in that extra, trying to get to the funding. And then again, it's just having a long-term plan for this. It's really not a 1-year fix or probably even a 2 to 5 year fix. It's a constant plan going against these assumptions.
Thank you, Gene.
And Doug, we usually receive our annual pension reports in the summer. And certainly once we receive it from MERS, we will definitely share it with the board, go over it in as much detail as you'd like. But usually in the summertime is when we anticipate receiving that.
Thank you.
The last slide that we have for you is a similar analysis of the other post-employment benefit plan or for the retiree healthcare plan. So there are a couple significant differences in how retiree healthcare plans operate compared to pension plans. Number one, there's no requirement by the state that governments make regular contributions. There's certainly no requirement that they make the annual required contributions that's calculated by the actuary. So essentially what's going into trusts are discretionary contributions that entities have been able to carve out of their budget. And the other key difference is that while the pension plan is currently paying benefit payments for current retirees out of the trust, the Road Commission has been paying for current retiree healthcare premiums out of the road fund, which allows the assets that are in the trust to sit there, continue to earn interest, and accumulate along with additional contributions that are added each year. So for that reason, as long as the market is performing fairly well, there will be a consistent increase in the market value of assets as the Road Commission continues to make additional contributions into the trust. And additionally, over the years, there have been some changes to the plan that have helped to decrease the liability. And it's also now closed to new hires. So while those employees that will eventually be eligible for retiree healthcare will continue to earn those benefits and increase the liability, there eventually will be sort of a top point in which it tops out and then begins to slope down. But that could potentially be still a long ways off. But if we look at the funded ratio across the bottom, it is very good news here where it's been steady increases from only 16% in 2013 up to now over 60% in 2020. And to put that in perspective, the state minimum for retiree healthcare plans is only 40%. So the Road Commission's done a tremendous job over a short period of time shown here on the graphs of making contributions into this trust and leaving them alone, allowing them to grow and getting that funded ratio up above 60%. So as we talked about going into it, these are long-term obligations. As Gene just said, it's not something that's going to be paid off in the near future, but it is something that the Road Commission, the board and management need to be mindful of, continue to give it attention in the budget and continue to chip away at these liabilities. The total of the two is over $44 million, which is a very large amount, but is something that can be worked at over several years, and hopefully with strong investment performance that will help to erode some of that liability without it having to come out of the budget in the form of contributions.
I would point out that in 2006, which doesn't show on this chart due to space constraints, 2006, we had $0 in the OPEB account, zero. So you can see the green bar, the kind of progress that has been made with the guidance and stewardship of this organization. So in 19, the green line was taller than the red line. So we've really made a lot of progress when you look at it beginning in 06.
And
Thanks to staff.
And that's really kudos to the board. We started, as Keith mentioned, there's not a funding requirement. It's more just it has to be reported. And our board, many years ago, decided to make this a priority and start funding it. And I think you're seeing the benefits of that. You know, again, 2019, the green line's higher, and 2020 looks even better. So I think this is a real source of pride for the organization that, you know, We could have buried our head in the sand and kind of ignored it, hope it went away, but obviously we'd still report on it. But no, we've tackled it head on. And, the fact that we're at 61% funded, I think is great. And I see that trend continuing.
And I would echo Dan's remarks that this board is singularly committed to make sure we take care of our people, that we honor our commitments, and that shows up in both the pension and the OPEB reports. So when Dan comes to us and says we can put an extra payment of X number $1,000 towards this, that, or the other thing, that's why we're in a stronger position and continue to become stronger on these accounts. So I would hope that the organization, the team here understands that the board is committed to making sure we honor our pledge to them in return for their good service to the community.
All right, that is all that we had planned to present for you, but we're happy to pause one more time, see if there are any final questions related to anything that has to do with the audit or the financial results.
I would ask of Keith and Jean, this PowerPoint is always extremely helpful to give context to the bound document that you send to us. And I would ask that you send this document to Cheryl or to Dan so that we all can have color copies of this. I want a hard copy. Like I said, I've got these back to 2013 and I found them really useful because I take my role as a board member seriously on trying to understand and be respectful and responsible here. I would also ask you why we don't get this document ahead of time.
Is that something we could start doing, Keith and Jean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well,
I apologize we didn't think to do it sooner, but we've had these prepared and ready to go for a little bit of time now. We shared them internally with Dan and Cheryl, but we'll make a point to share them with the board as well in advance of future meetings.
Yeah, Barb, I heard you loud and clear, and we'll make sure that we provide this at the same time that we provide the financials and the letter to the board.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you. I look forward to that a year from now.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks. And somebody will get me a copy of today's version, I assume, yes? Okay.
Is there any other questions anyone has?
It looks like a hands up.
Yes. I echo Barb's statement about an request for the PowerPoint. I thought the bound edition of the report was very good, very well written. And I was easy for me to read. And also the PowerPoint looked really good. I really like that and I want that too. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Commissioner Green.
Yes, on page 11, on your statement of revenue and expenditures, can you just touch upon the debt service and what that represents?
So the debt service is what you're paying on your current debt. So if you look at, maybe let me step back. If you look at page 11, you have the road fund, the subdivision, then you have total governmental funds. Those were really what Keith was highlighting. He highlighted the road fund. That's your operational fund. That's the short-term fund. Then you see these adjustments and then statement of activities. Just a quick overview. It's kind of a unique presentation. The governmental has governmental fund activities, and then you have this entity-wide reporting. The accounting basis is more long-term. So when we talk about these pension and OPEB obligations, they would only be in the entity-wide reporting. In the governmental funds, you really kind of do almost your uses of cash. The debt service is just paying any loan payments that are due for principal and interest that would be due on those obligations. And the debt is disclosed in note, I'm just trying to find it right now. I think it's note 8. So this would include any of the installment purchases. You have the Northeast Service Center you're making debt payments on and other items. So that's what debt service is. It's principal payments and interest. On the entity-wide financial statements, that debt service isn't an expense because it reduces the liability. So more of a traditional full accrual accounting.
So
know that was very quick, so I can-
what page are we looking at here?
We were talking about page
22.
11.
No,
Yep, page
okay.
22 is where all the debt is.
Yeah, yeah. I think that may be what Commissioner Green perhaps is looking for. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Rod.
Yep.
And Commissioner Green, just to, as a reminder, we've been financing 4 heavy trucks per year. And that's typically, I believe, a 5-year payback. So that's what you're seeing there is the remainder of the 5 years, any of the 5 years for the heavy trucks. And of course, we did the same thing for the Northeast Service Center. And then we do have the debt that we incurred on behalf of Ypsilanti Township to accomplish a lot of activities there. And they are, of course, paying us back for that.
So a typical,
Similarly, Dan, do we have a couple of special assessment districts that are in there as well where we?
Yeah, right. And that's in that middle column on page 11, the Subdivision Improvement Fund. By nature, we have to issue bonds for any new special assessment district. And then, of course, we have to pay those back as well. But then the money that's collected from the citizens is what we use to pay that back.
Does that answer your question, Rod?
so when you say debt servicing, you're talking about the cost of the debt, correct?
Yeah, that's the current principal and interest charges for 2020 on page 11. Mhm.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Chair.
What I would find helpful on your charts on page 22 and 23 is a column that says the year at which that debt is paid off. Or is that already there and I'm just.
So if
my
you go to
brain-
page 24, we are required under the accounting standards to show the future debt service and when it's expected to be paid off. So you can see for direct borrowing, your final payment is in 25, where the other debt is extended beyond that. So I think probably 2027 is when that final payment would be due.
But that aggregates everything, right?
Correct.
That's not the column I asked for. I asked for a column to be added on 22 and 23. So when we've got 2015 installment purchases, when is we clear of that? When is that paid off?
We can look at that with Dan. So we could look at either adding a column or adding maybe in the narrative where it says the 2019 installment purchase, when that's due. Because we are required by standards to show what's due within 1 year. So we do have to have due within 1 year under the accounting reporting. So if
Am
we
I
were to,
asking, yeah, am I asking Plant Moran? Dan, I should be asking you? Am I
Yeah,
right,
and
Trish,
Barb,
with you?
I was going to say, I have some spreadsheets for all of our debt service, including when they will be paid off. So that's something I'd be more than happy to share with you. I have one for all the installment purchases, and I have one for the special assessment bonds. And I'd be more than happy to share that with the entire board. We could go over it in a working session board meeting, but that's something that I certainly keep track of. And obviously, we're very mindful about debt. You know, you don't want to have too much debt. And I think, you know, our debt to equity ratio is pretty low. And so, you know, I do feel comfortable with where that is. You know, it's worked well with the installment purchases. We've received favorable interest rates, and we've been able to buy 4 trucks a year with MDOT participating in the depreciation reimbursement, which we're going to share with you in a little bit. So, you know, from that standpoint, you know, I don't feel like we have excess debt at all. But I do keep track of that for each installment purchase, and then when those will be paid in full. So I can share that for sure.
Okay, I am less concerned about the SADs because in my head, that's not our liability,
Mhm.
right? It's being
Yeah.
paid for by others.
Okay.
But when we look at potential facility improvements and such, it would be helpful for me to know when that other debt liability, you know, how are we tracking?
Right.
So
Okay.
that we don't end up in that credit card trap where we're in
Right.
way over our heads. And I know you
Sure.
wouldn't let us get there,
No.
but I feel a responsibility to have some confidence in being able to see that. Thanks.
No, I think it's a fair question, and I will definitely provide that spreadsheet to everybody that's in this meeting, and we certainly can talk about it if there's any concerns or questions.
Okay, it's more of a planning issue for me than
Sure.
other.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Okay, well, I guess we're all set with this. And Jean and Keith, thank you so much for presenting. Sorry, Cheryl, did you have a question or?
No, I was gonna
Oh.
do what you're doing right now. I
Oh,
was
okay,
gonna-
okay, go ahead. That's fine.
Oh, no, I was gonna simply thank Jean and Keith for being here today, for continuing to work with us. We appreciate the dialogue that we have as we're going through the audit. I do think that we have good practices in place, but this is always a reassurance that we are in fact doing the right things, following best practices. We certainly have come quite a ways in a year. I believe that this was the first virtual meeting that we had was when you presented to us last year. And Jean, I think your cat did a visit, so I was sort of
Yeah.
missing the cat this year. So
She must be sleeping somewhere. I haven't even seen her, so.
yes, so look at us. I think we've all come quite a ways in the last year.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your support. I know that you're a huge resource for this organization, obviously Dan and his folks in particular, but to all of us. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. All right, have a great day.
Thanks, you
Okay,
too.
you guys too. Thanks,
Bye.
thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye.
See you next year.
All right.
Yes, hopefully in person.
All right.
Okay.
So do we want to roll into first quarter budget review, Cheryl, or do people need to stretch their legs? We're due for a break here about 10:30. So,
I think staff's ready to go if we want
Okay.
to keep all things financial grouped together, and then I'll take a short break before we move into permits. So with that, obviously having the year end, the 2020 year end is a good sort of starting point as we talk about looking back at the first quarter of 2021. I know that we sent that information out last week. And Dan's got a presentation as well to go through. Certainly, I'll hand this over to Dan in just a second, but please ask questions as we're going along. I think that's probably the most useful way to have a good conversation on this subject. So Dan, you want to take over?
Sure. And I could talk numbers all day, so you know, don't leave it up to me as far as taking a break, because I could do this for hours. So certainly I love all the numbers, and you know, just a lot of valuable things that Plant Moran shared. Hopefully, you know, definitely, you know, there should be a level of trust with us, but it's nice. Plant Moran, they didn't have to say anything that they said, so hopefully you feel comfortable as far as our fiscal position at the end of 2020. We're in very good shape. You know, similar to 19, of course, who knew a pandemic was going to happen, and so that just shows the value of, you know, you don't want to have your fund balance be close to zero, because you never know when you may need it. And, you know, I feel fortunate that 2020 was such a good year. And, you know, just the fact that staff had been working remotely, you know, all the uncertainty, you know, just the level of projects that were accomplished, and, you know, all the capital expenditures that were made, and just, you know, you should all be proud of all the work that everybody at the Road Commission did. You know, unusual times, and we still got it done and did it well, and, you know, came in under budget. So just a really, really successful year. So with that, we'll head into the Q1 2021 budget. And so all of you should have all the details. And again, my thanks to Emily, who's been awesome to work with, and really her and Cheryl kind of had the vision as far as the new format, and I think it looks great, very professional, much easier to read. And, you know, it's been great working with Emily. A little challenging, you know, because a lot of this is still kind of new, but you know, as we continue to develop this, it'll get easier and easier. So I was hoping I didn't have to talk about COVID, but unfortunately it's still here. And so we don't want to ignore it, and we don't know when those impacts will end. And as we shared with you at the last board meeting, Michigan transportation funds were down significantly in February of 2021 compared to 2020. But we only have 2 months of data. Cheryl and I have a bit of a bet. So so we compromised. We thought we should have some sort of acknowledge some sort of decrease in the MTF. So we are recommending decreasing it by $750,000. Of course, in the second quarter, we'll have several more months of MTF data. And so we'll know more if we can maybe add that back or if we have to reduce it further. So obviously, you know, very important to our organization. We'll continue to monitor it as we go along. Next slide. As far as other revenues, we did have a little bit more from townships that we need to adjust. Chubb and 5 Mile, Salem Township, I believe. So again, based on the timing of the revenues, unanticipated for 2021, but based on the timing, there's about 81,000 more that we need to add back. And then Textile Road from Pittsfield Township, about $28,000 more that was not budgeted for. And then there are some changes to our non-federal aid projects, Laura Textile, Maple at Textile, that's from Pittsfield Township. So we are increasing what we're anticipating receiving from Pittsfield, but there will also be a corresponding expenditure increase as well. Next slide. So we talked a lot about our debt service. And so typically we are financing 4 heavy trucks each year with an installment purchase. And we've been getting very reasonable interest rates on that. But one thing, so we get our new trucks and we put it on the state trunk line. And how that benefits us is the state, when they do their annual audit, and I believe I shared with this board that we're currently going through, I think, the 2019 audit. They share in the depreciation of the vehicles. And so by putting the new trucks, you know, close to 100% of the time on the state trunk line, they're participating in all the depreciation costs. And we're getting some nice refunds from the state. And we're taking those refunds and putting them into one of those assigned fund balance categories, which Plant Moran shared with you. Well, we've built that up to a level that we feel comfortable not foregoing an installment purchase this year and using what we built up in our assigned fund balance from those audit adjustments to pay for those trucks. So initially we did have an installment purchase in the 2021 budget, and the proceeds from that is about $890,000. So since we've determined we can just pay cash for that, it would be an adjustment to the revenues of about $890,000. But we also don't have a 5-year payback, and there will be no interest costs. So kind of a lot there. I don't know if there's any questions on it, but this was definitely a good thing, and it's kind of working the way we were hoping it would. Any questions on that?
Yeah, it looks like Joanne has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, just to give an example, I know we just purchased a truck. For one of the trucks we purchased, I think it was $28,000.
Okay.
Or something like that. So using cash, I know, is that something that more bargaining power that it would have been less than 28,000 if we had paid cash for it?
So that we would pay cash for, Joanne. It's more the heavy trucks, like the big massive trucks that, you know, 4 of them, I believe, is maybe $1.2 million. So the rest of our capital expenditures, pretty much we do pay cash for. It's just these larger investments that we've chosen to finance. So we could, you know, before we started doing this, Joanne, the state of our fleet was not good. I mean, it you know, outdated equipment. Of course, now we have the wing plows and so on. And so, you know, that's something that Jim has recommended for quite some time. So the last several years, in order to purchase these heavier trucks, the larger expenditures, we've decided to finance them. But like the pickups and so on, we typically pay cash for all of those.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're getting a fantastic deal, Joanne. I think we've talked about that on something like the pickups, because we are taking advantage of bulk purchasing by buying those vehicles through the My Deal program, where they've already been bid, and we're taking advantage of that bulk purchasing. And we're already getting the best deal possible on those pickups. And as Dan said, something that's a relatively minor expenditure, we would be paying cash on. The financing really does apply to the bigger trucks that we've been purchasing.
And Joanne, something else the operations department's been doing the last several years is we've been participating in some online auctions for some of our older pieces of equipment. And we've been getting some great deals on that as well. And that money also is being used to pay cash for a lot of our capital expenditures. So, just a couple of things we're doing to try and be creative and if there's a sale of that nature, then it should go back to the equipment. And Jim's been very good about making sure that one relates to the other.
Sounds good.
Gloria, you have a question?
Yeah, so I know that you're great with numbers and I trust that, but some of what I'm thinking is I know that we're paying cash for that, but the return on investments is so great and interest rates are so low. So if the interest rate on purchasing is like 3% and the rate of return on an investment lately has been like almost 12%. Does it not make sense to finance, or it's still cheaper to pay cash?
Certainly, Gloria, we weigh all of that. And that's kind of why we've done the installment purchases for the heavy trucks. But again, with the money coming in from the state trunk line audits, we've been kind of building those reserves. And so it's not something we would do every year, but once every, maybe even 3 to 4 years, if we can pay cash, because we just want to make sure that we don't incur too much debt that potentially you get in a problem. Let's say, heaven forbid, another pandemic or some, natural disasters that we're having to spend down our fund balance. And now we're concerned about paying off, our obligations like your installment purchases. So we try and weigh all those things. And, and I think we have a pretty good plan in place to try to take benefit of low interest rates. We've been using Miller Canfield's as far as the bond council, and, periodically we'll see what the market's doing. Our Northeast Service Center for our installment purchase, I want to say it was under 2% was the interest rate, which is pretty amazing. And so, I don't want to say it's money for free, but anyway, we felt really good about that. So we kind of are also watching the markets and just all those factors, but we want to try and keep our debt to equity levels reasonable. I just had something with Standard & Poor's. We were looking at bond ratings. We're AAA rated, the highest rating you have. And some of that is related to your debt to equity. So we want to make sure that remains fairly low. So, kind of weighing all of our options.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So Dan, as a little bit about this trunk line equipment reimbursement, that goes to an assigned fund? Is that the word?
Right. Right. That's one of the assigned funds when you see the breakdown of our fund balance. And sometimes Plant Moran, there's several, so sometimes they have to combine the categories. But that's something that several years ago, in conjunction with the board, staff and the board felt, let's start taking these. Sometimes it's $300,000-$400,000 for an annual audit with the state. Let's start putting that into an assigned fund balance, build that up, and then potentially pay for the heavy trucks in cash and just forego a year of installment purchases.
And if I remember correctly, that was when Bill McFarlane was a member of the board, and he described how in Superior Township they created that, I think he characterized it as a depreciation fund, so that dollars that were related to heavy equipment got put in a fund,
right,
a savings account, so that we could do right by our heavy equipment and such. And I know Jim had done a fabulous job of outlining how old our equipment was and the replacement timeline. I think at one point for the new commissioners, we had vehicles that actually had holes in the floorboards because we needed to be a little more deliberate and intentional about creating a fund to keep our fleet in good condition, not pristine, but
Right.
in good condition. So kudos again to the team. And that was something that's happened just in the past few years, right? Because that was put in
Correct.
place after I joined the board. So
Yeah, right.
just
Yeah.
again, another example of the due diligence that's being conducted kind of behind the curtain by the folks that are taking good care of the organization and the money that we have to work with.
Right, and I believe at a future board meeting, Jim will have a status on the fleet.
Oh, good.
And while it may not be quite where he'd like it, hopefully it's much better than when we started doing this, because we've at least been able to get, like I said, about 4 heavy trucks each year, which, you know, we're trying to do what we can to have as much current equipment as possible, again, with all the other competing needs.
Right.
Yeah, Dan, I was going to say the exact same thing. At an upcoming working session, Jim will present on the state of the fleet. Once upon a time, we were feeling fortunate when we could replace 1 heavy truck a year. They are expensive. I mean, they're between $250,000, $300,000 when they're fully loaded. And that was a big investment on our part. But when you have 40 to 50 heavy trucks, that's quite the replacement schedule there, and a lot of maintenance that is needed in the interim. So finally getting to a point where we can begin to catch up. We're not completely there yet, but we've certainly made a lot of headway. And as Dan has said, we have a lot of competing interests, and we're trying to address them all strategically, not one at the expense of the other, but to try to make headway when we've dug ourselves some pretty big holes on a lot of different fronts, whether it's staff, whether it's equipment, whether it's facilities, and of course, our major responsibility, which is maintaining the road system.
Right.
And I would just point out the difference between our oldest heavy truck in the fleet and a new one is staggering. When we used to be able to do pancake breakfasts, and there was typically one of our new vehicles there, the technology that's involved in these new vehicles so that people can work smarter and more efficiently is just mind-boggling for this old lady. So yeah, there's a real need, and I know Jim's done a great job of reminding us about the replacement schedule that we need to attend to, and everybody else for helping us find the money to chip away at that.
Right. Yeah. Any other questions on this particular slide? Definitely a good conversation. Next slide, Emily. So as far as expenditures, we had budgeted about $25,000 in some shop equipment that maybe was going to be received in 2020. It didn't happen until 2021, so we want to make sure that we carry that over. And as I talked a little bit earlier, there were some changes to some non-federal aid projects, Bemis at Carpenter, Liberty at Zeeb, and Zeeb Road Phase 2. And Matt, I don't know if you want to speak to any of this. I believe some of it maybe was bid prices, potential change of scope, but Matt, is there anything you'd like to add to this one?
Those projects have not been bid out yet. They're currently advertised as of this morning. So we'll look to see where the prices come in. This change reflects the current engineer's estimate, and certainly we'll report back in Q2 on how bids came in and adjust accordingly.
So
Okay.
these increases are put in the budget just in case that's where the bids come in, that we're not blindsided?
Yeah, based on the updated engineer's estimate on the final plans that we got permitted and are advertising, we feel that there was a need to adjust the project budgets.
Thank you.
And Barb, we always monitor the federal aid projects and non-federal aid projects every quarter when we get together. And, you know, if there's any significant changes, we want to recognize those sooner rather than later, especially if there's, you know, more of a decrease of fund balance involved. And that's what you're seeing here.
Thank you.
Okay, continuing with expenditures. So the countywide seal coat and countywide millage seal coat, there are some adjustments we had to make here. Jim, I don't know if you want to talk in a little more detail of why we had to make these adjustments.
part of it is fog seal. Remember, we began the development of the current 4-year millage some time ago. And at the time, we were contemplating a single chip seal. And as the board's aware, last year we had the ability, the tools, and the expertise to add fog seal to that. So it increased the price as a result. And then we also have experienced some inflation through anything from wages to equipment rental to fuel to materials, liquid asphalt. We converted from blast furnace slag, which is no longer available to us, to more expensive trap rock, which we're very fond of and pleased with its performance. All of those things in combination have resulted in an increase in cost for both of these programs. We've taken that into account as we go forward. It is our hope, and Dan has driven this hard into our minds, which is to be conservative in our estimation. Not too conservative, but conservative, and I thank Dan for that philosophy. It's trickled down into our estimation and serves us well. It is our goal to, through efficiency this year, to overcome some of this inflation without compromising our crew safety or the performance of the seal coating.
And certainly that served us well. Again, referring to 2020, for instance, we had over $5 million deficit spending, and we're able to back that off to about a little over 600,000. And I think this is, you know, conservative estimating is part of that reason. And certainly that's the way you want to go, as opposed to, you know, budgeting for a $600,000 deficit and then it's over 5 million. That's the wrong way to do any sort of budgeting.
The final comment I'd make, Madam Chair, is that we believe seal coating is one of the most cost-effective preventive maintenance tools that we have available for our asphalt roadways, our major roadways. And you're seeing us performing this activity even a year after we've completed asphalt resurfacing. And that's all very deliberate, and that's value added to those expensive investments. So yes, we've seen an escalation in cost, but we believe it's justified and continues to add value to our road system.
And just one other comment about the conservative nature. The county millage seal coat, we assumed it would be coming from the road commission. It's unknown exactly what we will receive from the county millage, but we fully anticipate some of that 605,000 will be paid for by the millage once we get to that exact number of what we'll be receiving. But again, conservatively, we're assuming it's the road commission for now. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll go to the next slide. In summary.
I had a question, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Okay, I was just wondering, it seems like supplies across the board is harder to find because of COVID. And that reflects on purchasing power. You know, it's like things are charged more and there's less things around because of that. Is that gonna reflect on that seal coat? Is it easy to find those supplies?
So far, we've been successful, Commissioner. What we did last year, and I believe it was a very prudent decision, is we quantified all of the aggregate, all of the trap rock that we would need for this year's seal coat program, for both the county millage funded program and our MTF funded program. And we stockpiled all of that at our various sites throughout the county last year, under last year's prices. So it's those kind of good decisions that staff are making to help minimize the impact of scarcity or the impact of cost inflation. Trying to be creative and save dollars, stretch dollars.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, we'll go on to the next one then. So as far as a summary, 2020 again, we ended up in great shape. Again, pandemic's still with us, unfortunately. So, you want to, pandemic or not, you want to have a healthy fund balance, which we do. So our 2021 adjustments that we just shared would be another decrease of about 2.9 million, which would give us a projected fund balance of 15 million, which is about 18% of expenditures. And that's maybe a little bit on the leaner side, but not anything that's alarming. And as our track record has proven, we're able to climb out of our deficit spending by being somewhat conservative in our approach. So, I think staff feels comfortable with where we are and the first quarter budget adjustments. And, we feel like, despite all the challenges, we feel we're in good shape.
So I would just point out that the recommendation for a fund balance percentage is 15 to 20%. So 18 is still very responsible.
Where's the 15 to 20, Barb?
That's what I have in my notes, that's
Okay.
the range that's considered prudent.
Okay. I thought it was 20 to 25, but
Oh,
or maybe
all right.
maybe it's 15 to 25, but
Yeah, it was, I know it was at least 15 and I thought
Okay,
it was
okay.
15 to 25. So
maybe
we've
it's
got
15 to
two
25, right?
different opinions here, but
Yeah, right.
This could be a Post-it note from days of yore.
It could
So-
be, right?
I have a
So-
similar Post-it, Barb. I remember 15% being
Okay.
sort of the low end as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And feeling comfortable. Again, we know that we've budgeted conservatively here. And we believe that we have a healthy fund balance, which is very important, as we've talked about several times, especially with the pandemic, that allowed us to make decisions and to continue operations in a manner that we are able to do so and still know that that the pandemic was going to have an impact, but that we could weather the storm. And there may be other storms that come in the future, and we want to be prepared should that happen.
Right.
But we also need to make sure that we are making those investments, especially in the road system, but then also, again, we don't want to fall behind, whether it be with equipment, facilities, or staff either. So we feel that these are judicious decisions being made. We have not seen some of the bids on some of our projects, so there may be room for, improvement on those, as Jim indicated, that we will be very aware of costs as well, especially with staff as we start in on the chip seal program, wanting to make sure we give a good quality product, but that we're also being very careful on how we are doing that work as well. So I do believe that we will make up some of this projected deficit, certainly whether it by either the second quarter or certainly by the end of the year. But we think it's important to be conservative right now and still feel very comfortable should all of this come to fruition, that we still will be in a good place.
Any other questions on the summary here? If not, I did want to acknowledge Jim and Matt and their staff. The budget is clearly a team effort, and there's lots of number crunching by all of us. And what I like about how we have things set up is sometimes Jim and Matt will look at things a little differently than myself, and and then we'll compare notes, and maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 times out of 10 we're on the same page. And if we're not, then we can kind of have a healthy discussion about it. And, I think it just makes the budget even stronger with that. So I definitely appreciate them and their staff and all their time and effort, and feel really good about the budget that we provided to you. Any other questions?
I just need to make a remark. I failed to bring a power cord with me, so my battery is on power saver. I have emailed Josh and Chris that I need a power cord.
Okay.
But if I disappear, it's my fault. I'll be back as soon as I can.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Green, do you have a question?
Sure. The proposed reduction in the MTF funds, I knew that's a guesstimate, but what's that 750 based on?
It's based on, we shared with you last month that February was actually down. So the budget that we were expecting for MTF was actually an increase from last year. Currently, after 2 months, it's actually lower than last year. And so, you know, we don't want to overreact, but I think it was prudent to make some sort of adjustment now with what we know. MDOT has not changed their estimates. We anticipate they will. So again, conservatively, we felt we needed to make, in, you know, 750 out of, was it 31, 32 million isn't significant, but we just felt we should acknowledge some of the decreases for those 2 months. And we're hopeful, though, when we get more data that we can, you know, add that back. Was that good, Commissioner Green? Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, just want to talk a little bit about next steps. So for the 2020 financials, the board, basically all you need to do is receive and file, which I believe that's on the board agenda for this afternoon under consent. So basically you acknowledge you received the report and it gets filed. As far as the first quarter budget, the next board meeting, we would have it on the agenda. If there's any changes between now and then, we would cover that with the board. Otherwise, we would have our recommendations that you see in front of you for approval at the next board meeting. And besides that, I think that's all I have, unless there's any other questions.
Dan, I'd just like to thank you for this revised format of the quarterly report. This is really helpful to me. I like that the last page is now the first page.
That's right. Yep, and that was, I take zero credit for that, Barb. You know, I've been doing the budget the old way for a long time, and I want to say Emily's like, well, why do you have like the meat and potatoes at the end? I'm like, I don't know. We've always done it that way, and so you know that was one suggested change. Certainly a good one. Let's cut to the chase, right? And but everything with it just more professional looking, easier to read, and you know that's you know I give Emily all the credit on that.
And I also appreciate that the expenditures are broken out by department, and you've said like admin is 2% of the budget and operations is 15. But when I get to page 13, I don't see a percentage. Help me if I've overlooked it for engineering. And on the next page for capital improvements and trunk line. I mean, I'm trying to add up to 100%, Dan.
Right. Well, the capital improvements and trunk lines probably my fault. This is the first time we've broken those out, and so we maybe neglected to put the percentages there. The engineering should show the percentage.
Non-departmental is 13, but I don't see a number in engineering.
Commissioner Fuller, we can make that adjustment in the
Okay.
report.
Yes,
I think
we'll-
when we were editing from the budget initial review that we gave you last fall to this one, I think that part just got edited out, trying to weave what information needed to be in the Q1 report versus the overall report, but we can add that back in.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. Yeah.
Because I'm at 78%, so.
Right. It's got to add up to 100. I hope we can have it add up to 100.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I
Yeah.
promise we're gonna spend 100%. I promise.
Don't go over, don't go over.
Right.
No, but I promise we'll spend 100.
And please, I just, you know, this is the opportune time to ask questions because we are in such good shape and have been so responsible. So please appreciate that the spirit of my questions and inquiries is to lay the groundwork for going forward, right? I think we are problem free at this point. I want to stay there. And the best way to stay in that lane is to do our due diligence when times are under good stewardship. So
Yep.
I appreciate all of this.
Yeah, and certainly if there's any questions from the commissioners moving forward, feel free to contact me anytime. I love talking budget, so yeah, and I love to hear from all of you. There are great questions today, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very nice actually from staff's perspective to have these questions. We do appreciate the interest in the budget. Obviously, that is one of the fundamental things that this board does is approve this budget. And so it's nice to see such healthy interest in what we're doing and that we have the financial resources to be able to do all the things that we say we're going to do and the commitments that we're making to Washtenaw County. So very much appreciate the level of detailed questions that have been asked in this meeting. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where this gets stated, but it needs to be clear that the Road Commission is not going to be a direct recipient of any of the American Rescue Plan dollars. I think there's an expectation out there that the county's getting this pot and the townships are getting that pot, and that, boy, the Road Commission must be getting something too. And I think it needs to be made very clear that the Road Commission is not, at this time, correct me if I'm wrong, a direct recipient of any of those ARP windfalls that others are having to figure out how to spend.
You are correct in the statement that the Road Commission is not a direct recipient of American Rescue Plan dollars. In our county, those dollars are being distributed to townships, to cities, and to the county at large, but not to the Road Commission. We can look to see whether there's an appropriate place in the narrative to make that statement. But right now, it's not in there. You are correct.
And I'm sorry that I didn't make the comment before Commissioner Schenk had to leave the meeting, but just for people's edification, the county is getting over $71 million in unexpected funds out of the of this first wave of ARP money, and the townships also are receiving dollars. So let's just be clear that the Road Commission isn't going to be a direct recipient of those funds. So if people say, so what are you going to spend all your money on? You know, we've got it figured out, folks, based on what we know. Commissioner McCollum?
Yes, I was wondering when I read that, I was wondering, would the county give some of that money to the Road Commission?
Doug, put yourself on mute.
Oh my gosh.
I'll take a stab at that. So
Okay.
I guess a couple of points, and it actually, I do, like you, Barb, wish that Commissioner Schenk was with us because she maybe could clarify this. So first of all, I don't believe that the full guidance has been given from the Department of Treasury on exactly how those funds may be spent. There is some question as to what level of infrastructure those funds can be spent on. I believe the original legislation was very specific with respect to water, sewer, and broadband, with no reference to roads in particular. So does that mean they're excluded because they weren't specifically mentioned, or does that mean that you could spend, it's just not specifically called out? One of the guidance, or it wasn't an official guidance, but one of the references that I have seen has said that one permissible use with respect to roads and infrastructure not specifically listed would be the fact that many budgets were hit last year with COVID, and the intent of these funds was to replace those funds in budgets. So if a municipality, a township, for example, could make the statement that they would have invested in roads or bridges had they had the money last year, but they were unable to because of COVID, then that would be a permissible use of those funds. So it's a little bit of a, you know, I don't want to say an end around, but you'd have to be a little specific in your language on how you would be actually making that investment. I don't think that's going to be particularly hard hurdle to clear should any township want to do that, or the county for that matter want to do that. So I think there's a little bit of a gray area still on the exact language as far as what those funds could be spent on. I have spoken with Greg Dill and have asked, because they are establishing a process right now for basically right now his door is being knocked on quite a bit. You know, hey, you got $71 million, and there's lots of different needs that are out there. And so they are working through what process they will be using in order to, you know, have public outreach and prioritization of all of those asks for the $71 million. I have also spoken with Evan Pratt, who has really come up with a creative way of potentially having Water Resource Department, our townships, and the Road Commission work together. Now, we would fall under the guise of water, you know, trying to eliminate any ambiguity on the permissibility of those funds by doing that. If we could develop a program that would allow townships to come to the table and specifically address hopefully some of the local road needs, because as we're seeing different pots of money that are becoming potentially available, whether it's through the earmarks or some of the federal funding that may or may not be there, that's going to primarily be focused on the federal aid system, which for the most part is similar to our primary road system, but the local roads continue to have fewer funding mechanisms that are available. So if there's some kind of a program, and Evan was suggesting that out of that 71 million, that perhaps it would be 2.5 million type ask. So it's not an incredibly large ask, but it could be a very meaningful ask to put a program together that then 20 townships would be eligible to apply for and to address some of these culverts or other drainage needs that are out there, some of the storm sewer that may be on the local road system, because those can have some pretty big hits on a township, especially a smaller township's budget. So that was a lot of information. Nothing is specific. Like I said, I think the line is quite long on the requests for the $71 million, but I do think it is absolutely worth at least putting forth any ideas that we may have for consideration.
Sure, because I thought my understanding was that when they were talking about it, the government, the president, that it was infrastructure to go
well, the
towards.
other statement I've heard is that there is talk of an infrastructure bill and various numbers up to $3 trillion. I don't believe that has gone anywhere yet. That is just in the discussion stages. I believe that President Biden has a proposal that may be out there, but I'm not aware of any true action that's been taken in Congress yet.
Okay, well, thanks. I'm glad that we have had a conversation with the administrator, Dill, about this. Thank you.
Sure. Go through the
Commissioner
chair.
Yanis?
Yeah, so I know that at our last meeting, we were trying to encourage the different townships to learn how they could fund, but also have conversation with you about this. I guess, of course, I thought money, and I thought, oh, wow, the mandate about the tree policy. Wouldn't it be nice if they put some money towards that tree policy? You know, but I understand, as you're saying, as you've gone through the things, and thank you for that information that you put forth that made it really clear about what is required. That helped quite a bit understand. I know it's not just here you go. I figured it was for, and like Joanne, I thought infrastructure, but I knew water, you know, sewer, and you know, those things.
The third one.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. Thanks, Joanne. I thought the same thing. But as Doug laughed, I was thinking, yeah, everybody's probably asking for some of that money.
It has been a fast and furious last couple of weeks as different potential earmarks have become available, trying to strategize what makes the most sense for our organization. Clearly, we have lots of needs, but if you're going to ask for the money, you also have to be able to carry out the project should it come your way.
Right.
And that's been in addition to everything else that staff has going into a very aggressive construction season, even without all of this. But it is important that we get in the appropriate lines what we think are appropriate for our organization. I know know that Jim has been continuing to work with all of the township supervisors throughout all of this for our traditional local road program, but certainly should any of them inquire or have any questions with respect, and I think there's at least one township that at least was kind of hinting around with asking about had we received the American Rescue Plan funds, and so we've been clarifying that, and we're working on a communication to get out and to just be able to clarify we are not receiving anything on that, and if they elect to invest, we certainly are obviously more than happy to spend their money.
I'd also like to thank Cheryl for the overview that you provided yesterday in your email at 4:23 p.m. If you haven't seen it,
Yes.
You might want to take a look at it. That outlines the fiscal year 22 federal appropriations projects, the federal surface transportation program reauthorization projects, and then a paragraph about the American Rescue Plan. So I appreciate that you put that on paper in such a concise and readable way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely.
It's confusing to say the least.
Are we
Any
ready
other
to take a
questions?
break?
All right. Barb, when would you like us back?
10:45 is when our break is scheduled to expire. So take it away.
All right. Well, I'm going to speak very briefly and then hand it over to Matt and Mark. We have spoken previously about our permit rules and regulations and some of the need for the change, and we have publicly shared the revised documents and fee schedule, soliciting public input. So I believe it was Matt who shared the actual comments that we have received. And then as a result of those comments, staff has some proposed suggested changes to the original document that we have. So we'd like to give the board a summary of where we're at with that and what our intended next steps are, since we're hoping to bring this back to the board for ultimate approval in May. So with that, Matt, if I'll hand it over to you and to Mark.
I thank you. Yeah, so I had sent an email to the board last week with the public comments, and just as a reminder, we had a working session on this topic back in February 16th, where we presented the revised procedures and regulations for permit activities and fee schedule. And on March 24th, we did have a public hearing where we received comments. We also set up that webpage, thank you, Emily, to receive comments, actually having the document on the website. We even had the YouTube videos of the working session meeting and the public hearing, I believe, was posted on there as well. And now we're to the point where we're coming back to the board with the second draft. Essentially, we had some pretty minor changes in response to those comments. And ultimately, I'm going to hand it over to Mark to kind of review that. And with the goal of kind of reviewing it and discussing it with you today and seeking any other comments that you had with our goal of ultimately adopting these new revised procedures and regulations for permit activities and fee schedule in a future meeting in May. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, board. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. Glad to see that we're in very good financial situation after watching that presentation. So it's always great to hear. So talking about the rules and regulations of permits, it's gone very well. Just to do a little bit of a recap. I don't have any slides here, so we'll keep this informal. And if anyone has questions along the way, by all means, ask away and we'll answer them as best we can. There's, I would say, 5 significant changes as far as the modifications went to the rules and regulations. The first one was that there was an addition language for the small cell legislation, small cell meaning the 5G that was passed by the state legislature in 2018. So we felt that was important to make reference in the updated rules and regs, specifically section 4, which is all utilities. Being that that's going to be coming fast and furious is what I understand in 2021 and 2022 by Verizon and MCI, those applications. We had additions to permit being held compliant with permit holders being held compliant with ADA. So in other words, when they do some type of work within the road right of way, if they disrupt any type of sidewalk feature, non-motorized feature, that they have to make that then compliant, both during construction and after during restoration, so that it is compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We added
So the person who pulls the permit to do the work is responsible for restoring or establishing ADA compliance?
Yes, ma'am.
We're not.
Correct, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We added a section for discussion for non-motorized trails and right-of-way. That's very popular in Washtenaw County and for good reasons. So many permit holders, third parties are coming to the Road Commission with funds to be able to implement trails within the road right-of-way. So we added a section on that. So that was something that was not prevalent back in 2006 when we had that addition go through the board. We added language for lower sight distance needs on roads that have low traffic volumes. Essentially what that means is that when you don't need as much sight distance in order to get a driveway permit approved, not as many trees or brush or other roadside amenities need to be removed in order to get that permit. So that was a pretty big win, I think, for stakeholders, especially those who are building homes out in the rural part of Washtenaw County.
I have a question on that. I have a question on that point.
Yes,
Do
ma'am.
you want us to hold questions, Mark, or interrupt you?
You are the chair of the Washtenaw County Road Commission.
Yes, but I don't want to be the pain.
You tell me what to do.
Just the sight distance requirements.
Yes, ma'am.
How do we, I understand a road right now has low traffic volume. In 10 years, it has high traffic volume. What do we do then? Have you accounted for that somehow in this new language?
Essentially, Barb, how that goes through is that if, let's just say, the character of a roadway change from, say, 300 vehicles today to 3,000 vehicles per day, the fact of the matter is their driveway is then grandfathered in. And we would not have any mandates for that property owner to go back years later and remove whatever it took in order for sight distance to be achieved. Now, technically, per state law, we do have the ability to revoke a permit should there be a really safety concern, but it'd have to be pretty substantial in order for us to take that type of measure. And I frankly have not even heard of anything in my 22 years in the Road Commission requiring to do those that type of action, but it exists if we absolutely have to have it per state statute.
Okay, because I've seen signs that say, hidden driveway ahead or such to warn people and I assume that means there's a shortened sight distance, so slow down and pay attention, right? Okay, just wondering.
Matt, you had a state question.
Yeah, I just wanted to further clarify. So what Mark's referring to regarding the sight distance for very low volume roadways, ultimately there's less risk with less traffic volume on those roads. So we agreed that AASHTO has a guideline for very low volume roadways, and that would be by definition under 400 cars per day, average daily traffic. And when we're in those situations, basically we've got another tool in the toolbox to review an application. We've got a chart that says, all right, we can review this space and compare it against a little lesser than what would be, 5,000 cars a day or something like that, where the risk is greater. So it's really managing risk and liability and safety. And so we feel it's an appropriate application of this standard, and thought it was a good thing to incorporate into our new permit regs.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. The fifth, I'd call it change, but it really wasn't to the rules and regs, but a supplement to the rules and regs. We talked about the permit fees and making adjustments to those to meet current day staff cost. Again, it's not a revenue builder, but just to cover our costs as staff to be able to process, review, and monitor permits as they've been issued. I've had zero conversations, zero concerns, nothing from the public whatsoever on increasing our fee schedule. So I think that's frankly a good thing. It tells me that there's not reasons being presented to me why we should not, our board should not consider raising those fees accordingly if they so agree. So those were the changes that we were proposing as part of this round of our permits, rules and regulations in the fee schedule. As part of that public commentary period, we received some feedback, not a lot. Again, I consider that good because it tells us that we're communicating well with our stakeholders. In particular, I had 3 responses to discuss with you to brief the board on. One was from Detroit Edison, in particular the gas side, where it was twofold that they had comments on. One was when they replace a main within the road right of way, a gas main within the road right of way. Our current specs that was adopted by the board in 2006 says, regardless of the size of that pipe, they need to put a flowable fill into that pipe in order so that it does not become a liability to the road commission should it sever, get open, corrode, whatnot, and then create a sinkhole within the road right of way, and it be a detriment to our asset, in particular the road itself. After giving that some consideration and some back and forth conversations with Detroit Edison, we've come to the conclusion that we feel that a 6-inch pipe and greater is when it would be beneficial to have flowable fill placed within that pipe. I have shared that with Detroit Edison. They are aware of that, of our intent to propose to the board. And I have not received any significant pushback from them on that.
So Mark, what are you telling them they have to do?
As part of our rules and regulations, they have to, our current, that was passed in 2006. And perhaps I'm getting a little bit too much in the weeds here. So Matt and Cheryl, reel me in if you feel otherwise, moving forward. That it was basically when you have a pipe and you need to get of any size within the road right of way, that they have to put concrete in it. Just we'll call it flowable fill, concrete. And that is so that the pipe, if and when it collapses decades later, it does not create a sinkhole within the road right of way. That's primarily the reasons behind it.
So you use something besides the word concrete. What did you say?
Flowable grout or pressure grout is another term. And these are for lines that are retired in place. That means they're left in place.
Oh, so they're not being used anymore.
Correct. So that is a stipulation where, as a condition of permit to leave it in place, you are required to pressure grout it or flowable fill or
flowable fill. You guys, yeah.
Again, we are in the weeds.
Absolutely. Okay,
So
no, but that's good to know. So if you've got a pipe, you're not using it anymore, you can't just walk away. You've got to fill it with something so that it doesn't, when it collapses, if it collapses, the road doesn't collapse. Yeah?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
Exactly.
thank you. That's all.
So
I see Jim had a question.
Mr.
Yeah,
Harmon.
I read.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I read the whole thing. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mark. It was, you know, the nerd I am, kind of like Dan's stuff I read. So that clarifies the grout thing, because they requested, you had a 4-inch pipe and they request that we went to a 10-inch pipe opposed to the 4.
Yes, ma'am.
And so you're saying that you changed the 4 to a 6?
Yes, ma'am.
I couldn't see the change difference. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. 6 inches is what we're proposing to the board as our compromise to Detroit Edison.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, Jim.
Mr. Harmon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In reality, the concern's less the future failure. I think that's rare. The concern is the abandonment of miles and miles of underground utilities in our public right-of-way.
Yeah.
And the grout filling of it, regardless of diameter, is a clear indication of abandonment.
Yeah.
My primary concern is our workforce excavating in our right-of-way and encountering numerous underground utilities, not knowing, is this live? Is this abandoned? Is this a legacy line? What is this? Just last week, working to replace a culvert on Cherry Hill Road on the east side of the county in Superior Township. DTE failed to mark a live 3-inch high-pressure gas main. We hit it. Fortunately, there was no injury, loss of life, equipment loss, property damage. It was a disruption. Their crew came out and fully admitted, oops, our independent third-party underground utility marking service failed to mark that. Boy, that made us feel warm and fuzzy. Filling these lines is very little to do with potential future failure. It is an absolute assurance because these will not be picked up by misdig, but we will encounter them, and so will other permit holders and other contractors in our right-of-way. When they encounter it and sever it and it's full of grout, it's very clear that's a legacy line that's abandoned. So I maintain that if these lines are going to be abandoned in our right-of-way, they need to be grout filled, regardless of diameter.
And Jim brings up valid points, and that is the secondary point I failed to state. And ultimately, this is going to come down to a board decision as far as what's the balance. Detroit Edison Gas will come back and combat that, say it's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars that goes back onto the users of the pipeline system, that cost gets passed on to them. In particular, they stated it's going to cost them $10 million as part of their renewal project in Ypsilanti Township alone this year, if we were to require them to grout fill the every line that they are retiring in place. Their counter to that is you can smell it, you can hear it. If it's live, you know it. That's what they will tell you. So, you know, there's a balance point, and I don't dispute what Jim's saying whatsoever. It's just a matter of how far and do we bend? Is this an issue that we bend on in order to facilitate expectations and desires of our stakeholders who have, frankly, call it what it is, influence in the arena of politics. So that's.
And I would piggyback those comments as to, we serve the same public.
Mm-hmm.
We serve the same public that the gas and franchise utilities serve. And now it's just a matter of wading through perspectives and liabilities from our standpoint and from their standpoint. And sometimes those liabilities certainly can cost on either side. And Jim also brings up a good point, the misdig system on what it's supposed to do. If done right, they will mark their live facilities required by law. So we felt like this is certainly a compromise and middle ground that we felt was appropriate, and I'm recommending to the board to move forward with.
Rod, and then Jim.
Just to piggyback on what Jim was talking about, because of that incident with DTE, our entire neighborhood lost power. We were out for quite some time, and I didn't know what had happened, but thanks for Jim's clarification, you know, that's a really important thing.
That's the misdig
Out for quite some
mistake.
time.
Right.
Yes, Ms. Sig, right,
We were
Yeah.
deeply affected by it.
Yeah, separate from the grouting issue.
yes.
Mr. Harmon.
Madam Chair, again, these abandoned utilities, underground utilities, are exactly that. They're abandoned. When we excavate, or another permit holder, or one of our contractors, or another utility provider for that matter, excavates, these utilities that are abandoned will not be marked by misdig, but they will be encountered. And the filling of these abandoned conduits with grout is a clear indication to all parties that this is not a live facility. We fracture it, we cut through it, it is not live. We deserve that assurance in the field. Our successors deserve that assurance. There are miles and miles of this stuff under the ground in our right-of-way. The use of our right-of-way is by permit. And of course, the utility providers must comply with our specifications and standards. If they don't wish to do so, they can acquire their own easements. In some cases, they do. But the public right-of-way is certainly an important geographical area for them to place these utilities. My concern is the uncertainty that these abandoned utilities create for our workers. The instance that I described in Superior Township, that was a live high pressure facility. And yes, that impacted the community. We felt very badly, we broke that. And had we known it was there, we would have uncovered it. If it was an abandoned gas main and we cut it and it was full of grout, we would know right away, this is a dead line. And that is important, that is vital, whether it's 1 inch diameter or 12 inches in diameter. The utility company simply is trying to avoid cost. So it's really up to this board to decide, is this an important issue or not, to impose on them and all utility providers that would wish to use our right-of-way. I feel strongly that we shouldn't bend on this, but I defer.
Thank you. Commissioner Yamas.
Thank you, Jim. So, being in the field, I've more than familiar with misdig and these type of situations. But I hear Matt's recommendation and Mark's recommendation, and we do serve the same public, and the cost goes on to the same public. And a compromise indeed is, and there's a difference, because I have been in a pit when you cut, and there's a difference when you hit a live line and when you don't hit a live line. And if it's an abandoned 4 inch, you're not going to smell it, you're not going to hear it, and you're not going to be in danger. For those reasons, I respect Matt and Mark's decision. The cost would be huge from a 4 inch to the public, and we do serve the public. So it makes sense to me that we would follow Matt and Mark's recommendation and do a compromise to the 6.
I think it is
Not a
important.
danger to the workers.
Right, and Jim raises some very good points with respect to some of the challenges that we encounter in doing our work. It also is a broader topic than just whether or not we are going to require some form of grout filling of abandoned gas lines. We see this across the board. No offense, Gloria, with respect to AT&T. We have also encountered abandoned copper lines where we still are going to pause excavation until we have confirmation of whether it's a live line or a dead line. So I'm hoping that something like Jim is describing, which is very disruptive to the project that we are trying to accomplish, and usually with implications if we have a road closed or lane closures, I mean, that too has an impact on the public, that if we could, I think that hopefully we can resolve it in another arena, as in improving the STIG, improving locations of facilities, whether they're alive or abandoned in the future, so that we can all go about sharing that very precious space known as our rights of way, and accomplish all the things that we need to do within that right of way. And I do think that we're trying to find the best position that we can that makes the most sense with respect to our permit rules and regulations.
Absolutely.
Commissioner McCollum.
Thank you. I just want to understand that in our right of way, when we are working and we uncover the lines, that there is a certain noise you can hear and a certain smell to know that that is a live feed. Is that true?
For gas only.
Gas.
For gas. For electric, it's different. And for telecommunications, there is no noise. So, and that's just my experience, right? Because I've been in pits where we've hit live, we've hit dead. And even for telecommunications, even though we look at prints, you know, and like Cheryl said, it would be nice if we came together and shared all of our information. I've been able to go and look at prints to see that communications lines are dead, but I don't have access to DTE's prints to see what's been abandoned or not been abandoned, and or to consumers or DTE's gas lines. But the dangerous DTE is really, communication lines have about 48 volts of electricity in them, some higher, but the most deadly are gas and electric. But if they're abandoned, they don't carry anything. And I think that is to the safety of if it had anything to do with the safety of our workers, I definitely would see that. But when it is abandoned, they don't carry any gas and they don't carry any voltage, electric and or gas.
Well, Jim, how was that hit then if the workers smelled it and heard it? How is that gas line you know, cut or whatever?
The high pressure main was not marked. It was an unknown. So when we excavated to remove the existing failed culvert, we struck it, and it under pressure blew soil into the cab of our grade all, into the face of our operator. You did not get the smell proximate to the rupture. You didn't get that till you got away from it. And it was because of the pressure and the force that the gas was coming out of the main. Again, I'm talking about conduit in its entirety, not what's inside the conduit. Could be gas, could be petroleum, could be electrical cables, telecom, fiber optic, any host of things. Our standards for many years have required the removal of these abandoned lines or grout filling. So this isn't a new requirement. This is an established requirement. I think it's one that Edison specifically, I call into question whether any of these utilities have actually been doing this as required, but that's more of a policing issue. But clearly Edison doesn't want to incur the costs. They want that requirement to go away, softened based on the diameter of their facility. I'm not referring specifically to gas. I'm referring to all conduit abandoned in a right of way. It's not going to be marked. And when we hit it, if it's full of grout, we know it's a dead line. We're talking about abandoned facilities that are unknowns in the future when anybody's excavating and they encounter this. The first thing that we do is, oh boy, was this a mismarked or unmarked utility? Is this live? What is this? Is this a gas main? Is this electric? Is this fiber optic? What is this? And it's an enormous disruption. But if it's full of grout, we know it's dead. We know it's absolutely abandoned. That's the positive indication of abandoned. in our mind. Now, if it's a cable, that's a different thing. That's, you don't grout fill a cable. The cables are just left there. And that's an unknown as well. So we're talking about real issues that are encountered by workers in the right of way that encounter abandoned conduit of all sizes. And it gives one pause, believe me. And sometimes they're not abandoned. Sometimes they're live and they're simply unmarked facilities. This helps us know the difference.
Commissioner Yamas?
So my question is this a going forward thing, a grandfather thing? I know that, and respectfully, I know that AT&T does not remove their abandoned equipment. You know, I've worked there long enough to know that they do not. And probably as does no other utility, because it's not a police thing. But would this passage of the permit require them to go back and fill what is already abandoned, or is it going forward to what is abandoned, what will be abandoned in the future?
Yeah, it's a forward moving document, Gloria.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Doug Fuller, did you have comment?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. Mr. Harmon is correct. Absolutely, clearly, no mistake. Mr. Harmon is correct. I don't personally approve of a compromise on this matter.
Thank you. For what it's worth, worker safety perks right to the top over DTE or anyone else's bottom line. So I align myself with all pipes. And is it just gas and electric? Things
No,
that are
ma'am,
not?
it'd be any conduit.
Yeah, it'd be any facilities in the road right away. Ultimately, just for your information as well, DTE has provided some literature that we can certainly forward on because of their, making the request of this change. And ultimately, a lot of road commissions may have this similar requirement, but not all. We are not all aligned as road agencies. MDOT does not have this requirement. There are others that do not as well. And there's inconsistencies in the industry, and we all know what that means is they will get a lobbyist, and it won't be our choice anymore. Ultimately, I hear the issue of safety from the standpoint of our workers, but given Jim's example, if it was abandoned and not a live line, there would be no issue. It would just be knowledge of, oh yeah, okay, it's not an active line. That's different than the question of safety. If you hit an abandoned line, there's no worker safety issue.
Right.
It's just an acknowledgement, oh yeah, that's abandoned because I see grout. And there's further the issue of the practicality of grout filling a 2-inch line, a 3-inch line, a 4-inch line. It's very difficult to get that done. It takes great effort, and ultimately it's not practical. And it doesn't get done, I will say. Even though it's in our regs, it's a policing matter. We have 3 individuals assigned to permits essentially in the field at any given time, and we can't cover the ground that's necessary. And honestly, again, from my professional opinion, I think this middle ground makes sense. Certainly, there's different perspectives on this. I get that, but from the standpoint of worker safety, that's not in the equation for this discussion.
That's true.
I'll just, maybe I'll just, unless someone on the board has something further to say, maybe we could just button this thing up and then revisit it at sometime in between or at the board itself, the date that we approve this. I think like anything, there's balance that needs to be achieved in life, whatever we do. I don't diminish a darn thing Jim is saying because he's right in many aspects. And I think Doug supporting him on that is, I can understand why, as a former contractor, why he is in complete support of Jim. I think there's also the reality, though, that Barb, you and I had a conversation not too long ago about a concern that different counties have different standards, and then when too many of these things start becoming, everyone has their own flavor as far as what needs to be done. That's when lobbyists start getting involved and things start being forced down our throats. I think that there's a risk that this board, I'll just be candid, I think there's a risk this board is taking politically by keeping the trend as far as, and requiring, in telling staff, pressure, grout, fill everything. That's just my feeling. Doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean it'll come to fruition, but that's my sense of what could happen.
I'm going to suggest that we move on, and people need to ponder this, touch base with individuals for additional information if they need it, before this comes in front of us for approval or denial.
And we will go by the direction of this board as the.
I understand.
Okay.
Let's move on. It's now 11:20.
Okay, moving on, a couple more just highlights from Detroit Edison. It has to do with when they have a temporary, when they have the gas main break, and it doesn't have to be Detroit Edison. It also applies to water mains or sanitary sewers as well. So YCUA or Pittsfield Township in particular, in that what happens when they cut the pavement in order to make that fix? How do they restore that on a temporary basis? And right now, the temporary concrete is, what we require, and for good reasons why we require temporary concrete when it's feasible, in the sense of cold patch has a way of settling quickly once the main has been fixed, and basically it becomes a nuisance to the public where tires are blown out, phone calls are made, and there's an image that the road commission is not holding utility companies or municipalities accountable as to what needs to be done to repair that patch.
So what's the proposal, Mark? What's the proposal?
Is that we're going to continue to use concrete where we can, and it's just a timing mechanism where Detroit Edison has made statements of being their procurement contracts that it's going to take up to 10 days to put concrete back in. So it's just a matter of working with them within their procurement policies as far as when the concrete goes back in.
So what's the change? The change is being requested to allow cold patch versus concrete?
They would like to use cold patch across the board, and and we said, no, we need to continue using the trend of concrete.
So no change. This is just your response to a comment that they made.
More or less, and it just has to do with
Okay.
the time, when the concrete goes back into place.
Okay.
And then just basically, YCUA had some miscellaneous comments as far as where mains go in the right of way. We accommodated those requests. And then Lombardo Homes, two of their biggest concerns was they wanted to extend permits from 12 to 24 months. We're of the opinion that 12 months is applicable. And by the way, we routinely extend permits, granted an extension as needed. Rarely do we not grant that. So we said, no, we're going to stick with 12 months there. And then they wanted to have bonding as opposed to letter of credits, but we've had too many issues in the past where bonds have a way of not being, when needed to be cashed upon, being able to be reliable for secure our interests. So those are an overview of the comments that we received from our stakeholders on the proposed rules and regulations. And like I said, there was no comments whatsoever as far as concerns related to increasing the fee structure.
Okay. So are there significant changes that are being proposed that we should be familiar with?
No, ma'am, nothing I guess, okay. So I guess that's relative comment as far as the filling of the piping for grout filling. But aside from that, no, I would say nothing is significant.
Yeah,
Okay.
in the email that I sent, it had the document of second draft, and the changes were highlighted in green. And there's very few. There's probably on a dozen pages. Certainly we can reference the page numbers if you'd like. And you can see the changes for yourselves. But Mark's done a good job of summarizing them.
So to do the changes, you have to go through the 150 pages to see where the highlights are.
I can certainly provide those page numbers.
Okay. I guess what I was envisioning was a 1 or 2 pager that says on page 24, this is the change that's proposed. But if it's already there, I don't need someone to go through the exercise of.
I've got the page numbers. I will follow it up with an email.
Thank you. That
You
would be
bet.
great.
Anything else? Anyone had questions on or clarification?
I want to thank you. It was thorough. I was able to follow it and look for where changes were. Thank you for a good job.
You're welcome.
Ms. Managing Director, what would you like to do now?
All right, well, that concludes what we had on the agenda. So unless there's anything else, I think that is it from staff.
Commissioners, anything on your mind that you want to bring up before we adjourn? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor? Well, we have to do roll call, right? Tiffany, roll call, please, on adjournment.
Fuller,
Which
Can you say that one
Fuller?
more time? Yeah.
Commissioner Doug Fuller,
Thank you, Tiff. Aye.
Commissioner Roger Green,
Yes.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas,
Yes.
Commissioner Joanne McCollum,
Yes.
Commissioner Barbara Fuller.
Yes. We are adjourned